Okay, so let's learn about driven keys. Driven keys are a way to create a relationship between one object and another by creating an animation curve, only instead of value in time, you have value in value. So it's a very specific way of doing this, and I'm going to show you how to do it right here. All right, so right now I have two cubes, right? One is my driven cube, so I've named it here. The other is my driver cube, right? So we want one aspect of this driver cube here to control one aspect of this driven cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the scale of our driven cube match the translate y of our driver cube. And this way I can change value to value, but based on my own custom relationships. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to deselect everything. It's just kind of a cautionary thing so that when I bring up my set driven key window, and let's bring it up here. I'm going to open up my animation tools. And I'm going to animate, set driven key, and set. That brings up a window here. If I happen to have an object selected, what happens is it brings up the selected object as the driven object. And in this case, I've selected the driver object. And this is the cause of a whole lot of accidental reverse relationships created, basically making the relationship between one object and another, but in the reverse order. So I try to just say, have nothing selected here, and go to animate, set driven key set, and that just opens up a blank window for you. Okay, now we want to load in the driver, or the driving object. So let's select our driving, or driver cube here, and we're going to click on load driver, and that will load in our driver, and we've selected the transform node. So over here on the right hand side, we're going to get transforms from the channel box. If we happen to want to select something with the shape node or some other type of node, we actually have to select the shape in the input, which we don't have here because it's just a polygon. Okay, so I'm going to select my driven cube, and we're going to click on load driven. Okay, so now that we've got them loaded here, the driver and the driven, now look at the channels that we have available to us. So I'm going to click on translate Y for the driver cube, because we're going to, let's just select that. Now the selection you have in your 3D window is not going to match the selection you have in your driven key editor. However, if you click on one of these, it will actually select it. So it's kind of a nice way to flip back and forth between the two objects. Alright, so it's the translate Y here. And that translate Y, what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate this up and down. And as it translates up and down, I'm going to scale this driven cube here on the Y, so that it matches its same platform, but this one will happen with the scale. And then we were making a platform game, or doing something that created like a chart, and we were changing the scale value of this based on the Y rotation, or sorry, the Y translation of this. So I'm going to click on Translate Y and Scale of Y. Now you can only select one of the driving channels at a time, but you can select as many of the driven channels as you want, and therefore you can create a very complex relationship between one object and another because it can drive several channels at once. But for now, we're just going to click on Scale of Y. Alright, so I have my driver object, which is my driver cube here, with the translate of Y selected. That's the channel I'm driving with. And I have my driven cube, which is the scale of Y. And let's just click on that, and we'll select this. And the thing is, when you select this over here, you have to reload which channel you're creating the keys for. Alright, so now we create what's called a zero key. So this is our initial point, right? So I want to create whatever the initial point of value to value relationship is. I call it the 0 point, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to go ahead and click on key. What that does is create a relationship that says, well, this object's translate Y is at whatever value it is now. And the nice thing about these driven keys is they can be an arbitrary value. I don't have to create an expression or anything like this. This evaluates based on whatever value I set as my 0 point. And you can see that this is lighting up purple, indicating that it is controlled by something, by the object that we have selected. And in here you can see that this scale of Y has now been changed to red. It's been filled in with red, and that means that there's an animation curve key. And there is an animation curve key that is created. We'll look at that in a minute, but it's actually controlled by an animation, except instead of time happening, it's value happening. Alright, so now I'm going to create our second point. So let's just transform this, our driving cube, upwards in the Y. And then we're going to set our driven object to the value that we want it to be where it matches. And I'm just going to eyeball this. We could try to make it really exact and everything, but it's not that important at the moment. I just want to create an illusion that this, as it moves up and down, is changing the scale of this. So we're going to go ahead and click key again. So now this keys the final state. So now we can test our relationship. And we can see that transforming our driver cube in the Y will change the scale of the driven cube in the Y. Now, here's the thing. If you notice, as I'm driving it up, it lags at the beginning, and it accelerates towards the end, and then it lags as I get to it. So it's not really creating one-to-one. It's not doing exactly what I want. It's not being linear. And the reason for that is that it's created an animation curve with some tangents. So let's bring up our animation graph editor and take a look and see what happens. So let's go to our animation editor's graph editor. Now I've selected my driven cube here. And let's take a look, click on scale of Y. And it should load. Now here's the curve. Now notice the reason why it's lagging is because I have these flat tangents. And if you recall from your animation lessons, this will change, the rate of change from here to here will be less than from here to here. And if I want to make it one-to-one, I'm going to have to make this animation curve linear. So I'm going to go click on create those tangents and make them linear. Now the reason I'm doing that, or the reason this works, let's just take a look at this. This, generally speaking, when we look at graph editor curves, is time, right? Based on it starts at 0 and it goes up frame by frame. But this is value. See down here, driver cube translate Y. So that's what the driving curve is. And now here we have the driven value, which is our scale of Y. So it creates a relationship much like an animation curve, except on the horizontal is the driving object's channel that you input to the scale of Y. Alright, so now because it's linear, what's going to happen is it's going to move at exactly the same rate. Now what if I want it to accelerate? Well, that's pretty easy. I can just create myself an acceleration curve here. And let's change that to flat there. And now I can have this value lag at first and then accelerate as we get to the top of the curve. So between here and here, look how much different it looks than if I select my curve again and go to linear. And linear in this particular instance is what I want. I want the relationship to be linear. I want the platform level of this to equal the platform level of this cube. So basically I move that up, but I know when I move this object up, this object will scale in the Y, and their top planes will remain even. Okay, so that is how you create a simple driven key between one object and another.